You're listening to the Future Sense podcast. You can find us online at futuresense.it.
I'm curious what you've been busy with lately. I know you've mentioned a couple times when I've contacted you that you've been pretty busy. I know there's just a lot going on in the world right now. So yeah, I'm curious what kind of stuff you've been up to.
Yeah, there sure is. I've taken a couple of breaks from podcasting this year just because I've had other stuff going on, and some of it's been for my own personal healing work as well. So I'm trying to get back into a regular podcasting routine, and I'm also just noting what's going on in the world. And if I really feel like there's a strong message that seems to go out, I'm getting an episode out whenever I can. So there's been that. I've been doing a lot of back-end work, just done a little bit more of an upgrade on the Future Sense website, and a lot of management stuff around the foundation that I run. So I've got I think I mentioned before in podcasts, I've got a charitable foundation that I run as the executive director. So, part of my time is spent managing that. And particularly at the moment with COVID and the whole economic disruption thing, it's required a little bit more attention than usual. I'm working on a documentary film with Mitch Schultz, and Mitch, of course, was the director of DMT, The Spirit Molecule, and has been involved in a few other great documentaries as well. Mitch and I are in the early stages of developing a documentary series about the Graves' model and about human history and where we are at the moment in the change process and where we're headed in the near future, particularly with the leap into second-tier consciousness. So we've got a small team that we're working with. Mitch and Nevi, our editor, are based in Austin, Texas, and we're working with Martin Stebbing, who's a graphics guy based in Copenhagen. So we're on Zoom a lot talking about the work. And like I said, it's very early stage. We're working on a sort of a trailer/teaser at the moment, which is just going to give us a bit of a visual framework to then start working on a feature-length piece, which is going to be the first release. So that is planned to be like roughly an hour long, looking at a condensed version of human evolution from a Graves research-based perspective, and poking into the future, looking at this unfolding that's going on right at the moment, and then the big shift into second tier, which I'm expecting to happen on a sort of a global scale within the next 15 to 20 years. So there's a lot of work to be done there. It's probably going to be another year or two before we release anything much. But that's part of what I'm working on. And also, my partner and I are working on a plant medicine project. So I rediscovered my indigenous family roots within the last couple of years. And they'd been lost since my grandmother was separated from her mother soon after birth back in 1909. So all of that time, we'd lost contact with our indigenous arm of the family, and we've just reconnected recently. I'm just about to make my third adventure up to visit them again up in central Queensland. And we've been guided to do some plant medicine work with local plants on our country up there. Goring country it's called. So my partner Julia, she's quite a plant medicine expert. She lectured for 8 years for the Australian Bushflower Essences organisation run by Ian White, and she's quite accustomed with the processes of making plant medicines from native flowers. And we're going to head up there and hopefully in the next couple of weeks we're going to make our first medicine from Goring country up there. So we're looking forward to that. That's kind of the headlines of what I'm working on, and it's keeping me pretty busy at the moment.
That sounds cool. Are those plant medicines psychedelic then, or something different?
Not these ones. The native ones that we're working on are not psychoactive in a general sense. Some of them have some mild psychoactivity, but certainly not psychedelic. No, so it's a more conventional type of medicine.
That sounds awesome.
When I say conventional, it's not really conventional at all, because it's a very spiritually derived essence, kind of homeopathic in a way, but it's certainly not in a psychedelic category. No.
So are those indigenous plant medicine concoctions, or is it more of her own spin on things?
Um, it's based on the work of an Australian guy called Ian White, who came from quite a lineage of plant medicine makers, and it's working with Australian native flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it's not really, as far as I know, it's not come from a very clear indigenous lineage, but it's
Mm-hmm.
working with flowers that were used as medicines for sure by
Yep.
our indigenous Aboriginals here in Australia. What happened with this particular one that we're going to start working on is I had a dream early in the year. It was soon after I came back from overseas and soon after the whole COVID thing was really going down globally. And in the dream, I was up on my traditional country up there, Gurung country, and my ancestors came to me and took me to a place and showed me these daisies. And they told me that these are medicines. And so I woke up out of the dream and I thought, holy hell, that was very interesting. And I jumped on the web to look at, daisy medicine and what it's used for. And one of the things it can be used for is an antiviral, which seems very appropriate at the moment. And so on my second trip up to connect with the family up there earlier this year, my partner Julia and I went walking in a place called Kanya Gorge, which is in the western part of the country there, and I found the daisies that I had the dream about. And we went back and looked them up, and sure enough, it's called an Australian native daisy. And so this time we're going back up to make some medicine from it, and I've been working with some of my relatives up there who are quite interested in developing further natural medicines from the country up there. So it may well be, without a doubt, acknowledged as an Indigenous medicine once we've made it, and my Indigenous relatives start working with it. Yeah.
Perfect. So there's so many different things that I've thought about wanting to talk to you about over the past since the last time I talked to you. So I'm trying to figure out what the best places to start. But I'm thinking that I want to mention specifically, I know you mentioned the name Future Sense, but I want to let people know right away so they don't have to wait to get to the end of the podcast
Sure.
that you have an awesome show called Future Sense, and they should definitely check it out. The format has seemed to change quite a bit. It used to be a weekly show with co-host Nick Jeans. Now it's sort of just you. It seems to be a bit more, I would say, intentional, maybe.
Yeah,
Be
so
the right word.
as you say, it's futuresense.it on the web if people want to go check it out. And it started back in late 2017 as a local radio show here on Bay FM in Byron Bay. And my colleague Nick Jeans has been a radio announcer there for years. And so it was really him and I just having a chat about possibilities that gave birth to the show. And then it became a weekly radio show for a couple of years. And as a weekly radio show, we had to fill 2 hours, so there was a lot of chit chat and interruptions and songs and all those sorts of things like you get on the radio. And for that reason, I guess it wasn't as intentional as it has become now. And then because of the COVID shutdown, the radio studios closed for a while and we couldn't record. So then we started recording from my place in a similar kind of format, although it wasn't a radio show, so it became a little bit more focused. And then I kind of got guided to go solo with it over the last few months and make it fairly short and concise. So recently I've just been putting out sort of 15 or 20 minute or 30 minute episodes as opposed to 2 hours. I'm probably not going to get back to weekly episodes anytime soon, but I'll certainly be putting episodes out as often as I can manage in between all the other things that I'm doing,
Yeah, well, it feels to me like it's a little more bang for your buck, I would say. I mean, I really enjoyed the loose format and the conversational style. I mean, it's just fun to listen to you guys talk for me personally.
Yeah.
But I think it seems a little bit more purposeful now and more, yeah, I guess very relevant to what's happening right now and sort of just helping people understand what's going on versus just sort of you know, being a little more conversational.
Yeah, thanks. That's good feedback, and that's certainly my intention, is just to make it as useful as possible, and as you say, more bang for your buck kind of thing. Yeah.
So I know you've, in many of your own episodes in your show, and when you've been on my show, you've gone over the Graves model a million times. So I don't want to take up too much time with that, but maybe you could just give like the quick elevator pitch just for anybody who maybe tunes into this for the first time, just to give a little context for maybe where we head.
Incidentally, I just put up a resources page on futuresense.it, and there's a quick guide to the layers on there, and I'm going to keep adding stuff as I get time to that resources page. But the Graves model came from a body of research that began in the early 1950s and went on for about 10 years or thereabouts. And Clare Graves was a professor of psychology in upstate New York. He involved a bit over 1,000 people, 1,065 to be exact, in his field study, and he did all sorts of research in terms of understanding their worldview and their values and their behaviours. Many different kinds of data collection methods, including observation, self-reporting, constructed social scenarios where he would observe people's behaviour, those sorts of things. And then all of the data that he gathered, he gave to a group of 7 peers, and he said to them, without wanting to try and shape their interpretation of the data, he just said, have a look at all of this and see what patterns you can find in it. And what came out of that was absolute gold, in my opinion, a very, very insightful model, which still stands out in today's world as a unique insight into human nature. And there were 3 main elements to it. One was he realized this connection between the complexity of our life conditions and the development or evolution of human consciousness. So human consciousness is quite plastic and adaptive, and depending upon the challenges that we're faced with in everyday life, our consciousness will adapt to operate at certain levels of complexity. And he mapped those levels of complexity out as 8 levels, he called them at the time. I'm calling them layers these days, because he did explain that they're not freestanding versions of consciousness. They're all nested inside each other. So you've got the most simple, basic survival consciousness at the core, and then over the top of that is another layer and another layer and another layer, and he mapped 8 of those. And those 8 layers, when you look back at the evolution of our species, they conform to hunter-gatherer behavior, traditional tribal behavior, martial or warlike behavior, agricultural era behavior, scientific industrial era behavior, and then interestingly they go 3 steps into what is essentially the future when you're talking about the global sort of dominant consciousness at the moment. The next one after the scientific industrial being what he called relativistic, which it's often called postmodern, but it's a very human-centric, anthropocentric, you might say, consciousness that's interpreting everything on the basis of human experience, like how does it feel to experience this, and how are we connected to nature. It's very network-centric, and it's what is unfolding right now around the world as the scientific industrial structures crumble. The next thing that we're seeing rushing into the space is this relativistic mindset, very humanistic mindset, saying, we've lost our humanity, we've got to return to considering the human experience and looking after people rather than just thinking about money. And we have to network together, we have to collaborate, cooperate. And these layers, Graves identified, they swing between a focus on individuality and a focus on community. So we've been through a very individual era with the scientific industrial layer 5, and now we're moving back to the communal focus in layer 6. And then beyond layer 6, Graves found that there was this, what he called a momentous leap between 6 and 7, where the coping capacity of a human just went through the roof. It was literally a kind of quantum leap in our capacity to solve problems and make sense of reality. And so he identified a very small number of people back in the 50s and 60s who had made that leap, and so he gathered a reasonable amount of data on it. And how many people there are out in the world right now who are operating at that 7th level, which is the first step into the second tier, what he called the second tier of consciousness. I'm not sure, but it's an integrative way of understanding reality where for the first time it seems the left and right hemispheres of our brain are working in unison. And the first 6 stages alternating between individuality and community, that is also a reflection of a left brain and right brain focus. And so we've stopped kind of flipping between those two things, and all of a sudden we can bring them all together and work together with those two things, with the left brain and right brain concepts. And that's part of why we've got this amazing extended capacity in layer 7 and beyond. And then layer 8, he only found 6 people who exhibited some evidence of that, didn't gather enough data to really say much more than, well, it looks like it's got a kind of community focus, although it's still integrated. And seems very spiritual, he said. It's very much based around intuition. And what we've kind of put together, since Graves passed away, is it seems like this layer 8 is going to be the layer that brings the next real global stability for us. And we don't have a time frame on that, but if I had to guess, I'd say sort of 20 plus years from now, probably thereabouts anyway. So that was the second key thing that came out of his work, was this layered consciousness pattern. The first being the adaptive relationship with complexity of our life conditions. And then the third thing that came out of his work was an understanding of how the change process in between those layers plays out, what the trajectory looks like. And it's very, very similar to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. It's kind of like a process of feeling like something needs to change, everything falling apart, going through a chaotic alchemist's furnace type experience where, we really feel the pressure, and that pressure causes us to rewire our brains and change our body chemistry and those sorts of things. A big breakthrough on the back end of that, and then an integration phase where we sort of greet the world with renewed energy, and we're all enthusiastic again, and we're seeing the world differently, and we want to become stable, and we come back to a place of new stability that's more capable, which represents a more complex layer of those layers of consciousness. So that's kind of like a nutshell explanation.
Yeah, that's great. So it seems like, it's been, for people who are maybe further along in that development, it's been pretty obvious that there are some, have been breakdowns of this layer 5 structures for quite some time now, but it seems like right now there's very acute signs of this happening with the election stuff in the US and COVID and all the polarization and all of this stuff going on. How do you feel about where we're at in that process of the transition from, the layer 5 dominance into this layer 6?
What I think is that layer 6 is in some ways not going to be dominant, in the way that layer 5 was. Layer 5 was very individually oriented, and layer 6 is very communally oriented. So we shouldn't expect it to show up in the same way. In some respects, it's already got a pretty strong hold on the world, though, because it's network centric, and you look at the impact that networks are having on the world right now. So layer 6's technology has certainly changed the world so much that layer 5 thinking really can't keep up with that. It can't manage it. And if we look at all the things that are failing right now, they're pretty much all the things that were designed before the internet came into existence. And the internet has made the world so much more connected and so much more complex that these old systems just can't cope with it, And I'm constantly laughing at the Australian government systems here in Australia when they try and introduce computer systems into these old government departments that were designed before the internet existed. And it's just ridiculous, the basic mistakes that they're making. And it's a reason why our current forms of government just aren't going to survive this transition. And I guess the US election is front and center, a global stage show of those failures right now, right before our eyes. And in terms of time, what it looks to me is going to happen is that we're really going to just go through almost like a rolling change process right through the layer 6 influence. And layer 6 is creating certainly a foundation for us to leap off and make this tremendous momentous leap that Graves mentioned into second tier at layer 7. But I think it's going to be hard to pick, where layer 6 peaks and finishes and where layer 7 really kicks in. I don't think it's going to be certainly not as clear cut as things like the scientific industrial revolutions, which were very clear markers that showed, okay, these are real, turning points for that shift between the agricultural layer 4 era and layer 5. I think it's going to be harder to sort of spot that. When you look at the length of time that each one of these layers of consciousness has been dominant on the planet, they get shorter and shorter and shorter on a kind of a sort of logarithmic or reverse logarithmic scale, I guess. And we can see, looking backwards, that the dominance of the scientific industrial era was, maybe 300 years roughly. The agricultural era was dominant for many thousands of years. And so we should expect no more than a decade or two really for layer 6. And then we're going to be into second tier. And I can see that there's a tipping point coming around 2032. There are many, many different sources and techniques that are indicating 2032 as a tipping point. And I suspect that will be the tipping point for second tier influence on the planet, with a form of stability coming in the late 2030s probably. So right now, I think between now and 2032, I think it's going to be a very confusing and chaotic time. Because of the nature of layer 6, we shouldn't expect things to get too organized. Layer 6 is very focused on the process of communication, but it tends to often lose sight of concrete outcomes and gets lost in just wanting to keep communicating and talking about things. And it's, I guess it's kind of like going into a network where it's a flat network and there's no clear delineation of what's important except for the human bond, and so the key driver of layer 6 is deep human connection. And so layer 6 is not going to be distracted or attracted by hard evidence of, in an old scientific method. It's going to be attracted and distracted by human relationships. And where things feel the best, where the bonds are the deepest, that's where the layer 6 attention is going to go. So, that's going to be very healing for the planet. When you look at the damage that's been done over the last hundreds and thousands of years in terms of conflict between peoples, layer 6 is bringing tremendous peace and healing to that process. And it's solving a whole bunch of other problems by shifting resources around, but it's not going to bring stable global structures. They're going to come after the second tier influence really kicks in.
It seems like, so how does that factor in the extreme polarization? I mean, some of it maybe comes from the fact that there are plenty of people still in, 5 dominant and some in 6, and they're seeing the world completely different. But also it seems like even amongst people who might all be sort of more in a 6 dominant space are still sort of getting sucked into these more tribalized, where they're not able to entertain somebody else's perspective. Or I think I've maybe heard even you on Future Sense mention before that maybe one of the sort of shadow aspects of layer 6 is sort of accepting everybody except for some specific group, or the people who aren't accepting, or whatever that might be. Maybe you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. I often make a joke about it and say, we're all really loving people here. We treat people right, not like that guy's over there, those guys over there. So there's this kind of contradiction, in the behavior sometimes, where if you get a group of people together who are all layer 6, it's going to be beautiful, peaceful and loving and all that kind of thing. But as soon as they bump into another layer of consciousness, it's like, here they come. So Graves found in his research that in layers 1 through 6, which he called the first tier of human consciousness, there's an inbuilt rejection factor in each value system associated with a layer. So what that means is that people will prefer to be around other people who share the same layer, the same value system as them, and they will automatically reject different values that come from other layers. So even though layer 6 is essentially seeking inner peace, it's seeking social peace, and it's seeking to rebalance our connection with nature, which are all good things that the earth needs, they are still rejecting older value systems. So, and the strongest rejection is usually the value system that we've just come from. So, at a personal level, when we grow through layer 5 and into layer 6, then layer 5 seems like old, out of date, bad, and even to the point of we want to destroy it. And we're seeing a lot of that talk on the planet at the moment, people who want to just destroy industrialization completely and go back to living like layer 2 or something like that. And that's a predictable aspect of layer 6. So that rejection factor is really the biggest issue that we're seeing, and it's the source of all the conflict throughout history, is this rejection of other values and not being able to understand people from different value systems or layers. The other thing that's coming into play is what's called a values regression. So when we go through the change process, early on in the change process, we realize that, okay, the way I'm living, the values that I'm living through aren't working very well. Therefore, something needs to change. I'm not sure what it is, though. And so, of course, we can't see into the future and our future values. What we do is we look to the past and we go, okay, maybe if I go back to the way I used to live 10 years ago, maybe that'll work again because it worked back then, right? So we go on this journey backwards through the value systems, and what that means at the moment is people who are sort of transitioning into layer 6 are going backwards to layer 4 sometimes, or layer 5, because they're coming out of 5, right? 5 isn't working for them. And so they'll go back to 4, which is really rigid, authoritarian kind of behavior. And we're seeing a lot of that at the moment. That's really being highlighted, that layer 4, authoritarian, black and white. There's only one way to do things, and it's got to be my way or the highway, and for some people, they may even be slipping further back into layer 3, which is very warlike and sees everything as a power struggle and wants to fight in order to resolve problems. So it's a mixture of those things. Firstly, just the inbuilt rejection factor, which means that everybody who's popping into layer 6 at the moment doesn't like layer 5 or layer 4 or layer 3 or layer 2 or layer 1. There are resonances, there are resonances between the communal systems. So layer 6 may resonate with layer 4 in some ways because of the conformist nature of the communal systems, and layer 6 usually resonates very strongly with layer 2, which is our traditional sort of indigenous tribal kind of ways of living. So you get a harmonic there between the communal systems, which also plays out, and the sum result is what we're seeing in the world right now. A lot of authoritarian kind of stuff getting thrown around, a lot of people saying that's wrong, we've got to destroy the scientific industrial way of living and change the whole world to live this way, which is the layer 6 way. And thankfully, once we shift into second tier consciousness, that rejection factor disappears. So one of the things that makes layer 7 so capable is that it can directly sense the frequency of value systems. And so when interacting with another person, a second tier individual can read their frequency and go, okay, this person's coming from here, and there's an inherent instinctive understanding of what that means and how I need to communicate with that person, So that just changes everything, because all of a sudden we don't want to fight people, we don't want to destroy different cultures, we don't want to destroy different value systems, and lots more becomes possible.
Well, it makes sense because I see so much of you could call it communication, but it's not really communication per se. It's maybe an attempt, but it's mostly arguing or fighting or accusing people of being. Everybody's accusing each other of being Nazis, basically.
Yeah.
But something I've been kind of thinking about is, and tell me how you see this. But so I've made it a point to just out of my own interest, like follow people on social media that have completely opposing viewpoints and just really sort of kind of try to find the best argument for each side of an argument, the best evidence for each side of an argument, or the most prominent person on each side of some political debate or whatever it might be. And
Yeah.
it's just very interesting to see, sort of bits of truth in each side that each side would probably agree on. But I don't know, I almost get the feeling that because of our isolation, the extreme amount of isolation that has come from the layer 5, people are so desperate desperate to feel like they're accepted into a certain tribe or a certain group, that it almost seems to shut down the ability to sort of think on both sides of the aisle, and that they have to sort of subscribe to a certain, a certain to certain ideas or thoughts or whatever along the lines of what fits into that group, so that they make sure that they're accepted and held in that group, just for like a survival aspect of that feeling of belonging. Does that seem accurate?
It does. It's very accurate. What you said at the end there about that need to conform, to fit in, to be accepted is a key driver of layer 6. So we're looking for deeper human connection, and to get that deeper human connection, we've got to be accepted into a peer group. And so this caused a lot of confusion over the years amongst people who've studied some of Graves's work and who've studied developmental psychology generally, and even Ken Wilber, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, who's done some amazing work. Even Ken got confused with this. And the confusion comes from the fact that most people don't understand that the morality and the value system of layer 6 is built around this need for deep connection. And so if you just look at the surface level stuff, like what people are talking about, and who they're hanging out with or what topics they might be interested in, you don't really tap into that deeper driver. And because people are just chasing the connection, they can change what they're talking about, they can change what they're interested in, they can change who they're hanging out with, and it looks like they're being dishonest, it looks like they're being immoral sometimes. It looks like they're not being honest to their morals, but actually they are, because they're being genuine in terms of that deep need for connection, and that's what they're following. So it can create it has created a great amount of confusion around the nature of this particular layer of consciousness, in the technical world of people who study these things. And you've just got to understand that. You've got to understand that what people are looking for is connection. And in terms of, finding ways of convincing people or changing their opinions and those sorts of things, it's a common misconception that you can logic someone out of their value system, but you really can't. The value system is rooted in subconscious frameworks which help us make sense of reality. And it's a code. It's a very, very deep code that's not in our conscious mind. It's deep, deep down. And, you can't give someone 20 reasons not to be authoritarian and have them say, yeah, okay, yeah, I see. Yeah, sure, I'll change. Because it's coded in much, much deeper than that. It's just not in the rational mind. So the best thing we can do is to understand where other people are at and appreciate that, and use work like Graves's model to help us understand, what is motivating them, what they need, where they're at in the change process. And pretty much all the conflicts that the world has ever seen has come from people wanting to change other people to be like them. Like, look at these people, they've got the wrong God, they're not living the right way, they're breaking all the moral rules, they need to be like us. We can fix them. And that never works. If we look back at history, we can see it never works. The only time when it kind of appears to work is when there's so much power applied that people have no choice but to bow down in the face of that power. But as soon as the power is removed, they go back to the way they used to be, so it doesn't actually change people. And that's something that humanity's still got to learn. We're still yelling at each other, trying to change each other's opinions, and hoping that'll work, when if we actually took notice of history, we'd see it doesn't work.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I see it in the US here more than ever with the political climate, with the election. It's sort of like these two sides that both sort of expand on the same message, like you're saying, which is basically like there's something wrong about the what you think and how you feel, and you need to feel and think how I feel. And it seems like really ultimately it feels like it's a sort of an obstacle that's an opportunity to expand our perspective to include both things. And is that sort of some of the drivers for the push to an integral layer to this like integral perspective is just the intense polarization sort of requires the need for this expansion to include both, all perspectives somehow?
Yeah, I mean, layer six, one of the key characteristics of it is that it's very capable of taking different perspectives. It's kind of like has what they call the wisdom of the moccasins. It can put itself in someone else's shoes and really start to appreciate what it must be like to be that person. It's like I said, it still has that inbuilt rejection factor of other people's values, though. So it can't fully appreciate what it's like to be in another value system, although it might be able to appreciate what it's like to be in a person in a particular scenario in life, and have compassion for that. But what happens with this transition into second tier is that we reach the end of the dominance of the rational mind. So you can break down those layers into zones, the first one being the pre-rational zone, which is layers 1, 2, and 3, so basic hunter-gatherer type stuff, traditional tribal and martial or warlike behavior, is generally dominated by deep urges and instincts and strong emotions, okay? And so when you're dealing with people who are operating through those layers, rational arguments generally don't work very well because that's not what's driving them. They'll listen and they'll understand, but at the end of the day, their deep code is saying, follow this urge, follow that instinct, follow that emotion. And that's what they're doing. And then layers 4, 5, and 6, which is your agricultural era, authoritarian, scientific, industrial, highly rational, materialistic, and then this emerging layer 6, humanistic, network-centric. They're all still dominated by the rational mind. So they're looking, to use that rationality to change other people, as you've been saying. Layer 6 also is in a very tricky place because it's just about to reach the end of the usefulness of the rational mind. And in order to prepare the being to make that transition, what it needs to do is it needs to go back and revisit all the pre-rational stuff as well. Just make sure everything's in order, that everything's been finalized as much as possible, everything's been healed, all the trauma's been dealt with, so that we've got a solid platform to make this huge leap from into second tier. And so poor old layer 6 is kind of like still dominated by the rational mind. It's trying to quieten that mind down, and there's a million spiritual courses and meditation classes trying to teach you how to quieten the mind. So it's trying to cope with that. It's also trying to cope with all these emotions coming up, and it tends to get somewhat easily overloaded by all of this data coming in from all of these both pre-rational and rational senses in the body. And sometimes it can get quite lost, with that overload of inputs and just not know what to do. And so that's where it just goes back to the I need to be around people that I'm bonded with and who make me feel safe and that understand me, and hence that key driver. But what happens as we get closer to the second tier transition is that the usefulness of the rational mind for solving our problems starts to break down, and does break down entirely. And so we go through that change process, which sometimes is called the dark night of the soul, where everything falls apart. Everything that we've ever used to solve our problems doesn't seem to work anymore. We have to completely give up, fall apart, crash, burn, and then somehow climb out of the wreckage. And in that wreckage, in the heat of all that change, is when our neural networks get rewired, our body chemistry balance changes, new hormones come into play, those sorts of things. And what's on the other side of that is this direct knowing. It's this, what you might call a kind of deep intuition sense, where stuff just comes to us, and we can't really explain rationally where it comes from, but we just know what's right, and that's the kind of prize on the other side of that hill that we're all heading towards at the moment, and it's useless to try and solve the world's problems with the rational mind at right now. I mean, I guess useless is probably a bit of a harsh word. It's not useless. It's helpful with problems that are of a certain level of complexity that allows them to be solved with rationality. But as we've been talking about, there are a whole bunch of problems, including, getting on with other people where that rationality just doesn't cut it, So we need to understand our limitations. Those of us who have got the sort of the broader outlook at the moment and the understanding of what's going on in the terrain that we're traversing need to understand that, okay, some of the things aren't going to get solved right now. And it's actually useless putting our rational-minded effort into trying to solve that because, that's good. Some people need to be doing that right now, but for those of us who can see further into the future, there are more important things that we need to focus on. And one of those, of course, is helping to support the shift of consciousness. I mean, ultimately, that's the biggest thing that we can do, is to support people who are ready to make the shift to be moving from first tier into second tier, because that's where all the solutions of our most serious issues, serious problems are going to come from.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've found for myself over the past however long it's been, especially the past year or so, that I resonate with some of the layer 7 things you're talking about, but I feel like I'm still pretty dominated by my rational mind. But I recognize that in certain areas it just is obvious that it requires something more, a move beyond that, because a perfect example is the realm of, and I think we find this in a lot of different areas, but the realm of diet, for example. When I was real strong into a layer 5, I was trying to find the perfect diet and all the evidence and the science behind it and all of these things. And the further I've gone on the track of trying to find a diet that is really right for me, the more you find evidence, opposing evidence for any single type of food or diet. Eggs are great for you. Oh no, eggs are terrible for you. This is great for you. This is terrible for you. And there just starts to push you to find some other source of, wisdom within you to guide you as to what you should eat, because these sort of empirically derived forms of information just seem to be more and more complex and sort of more and more, harder to really pin down as to what's true.
Yeah, that's a great example, and if you look at that example through the different layers, I mean, layer 4, the authoritarian, always looks to a higher authority for a list of rules on how to live life. Okay, so from layer 4, it would be, the authority that I respect, and it could be a God that I worship, says in the scriptures, here are the things that I should eat. So there's no choice. There's only one right way to do it in layer 4. And then layer 5, of course, looks for the best. It discards that higher authority and says, no, actually, I can figure it out for myself and I can make it better. I can make it the absolute best and be most successful. And so that's where you get all these, absolute best diet that you really need to be on kind of lists coming from. And then in layer 6, because the focus, it shifts away from my personal success, how can I be the best, to that need for deep human bonding. It's like, okay, here's my network of people that I really trust, who I'm bonded with. What do they all say about what they're eating at the moment? And they'll sit in a circle and say, what are you eating? What are you eating? And everybody reports what they're eating. And then the solution comes from that networked process, right? But then when we go into second tier, part of what we're doing in layer 6 as preparation for second tier is connecting with our body, which we've pushed to all sorts of limits in layer 5, but not really understood damage that we're doing in the process, like with the planet. And so in layer 6, we're reconnecting with nature. We're also reconnecting with our body. And we're starting to listen to our body, and we're working with that process of casting out through our network, what do we need to be doing right now, and how are you doing it? and learning from that. But then eventually, as we start to transition towards second tier, we're connecting with our body to the point where our body's actually speaking to us, and we're getting direct knowing coming from our body, and we know that, okay, I can't eat that because when I eat that, I can feel my liver complaining, or something like that. So that's the kind of space that you sound like you're pushing into at the moment, is getting those direct messages and feeling that, why don't I feel so good this morning kind of feeling. And then you think about, okay, maybe it's because I ate or drank that last night. Oh yeah. And you start to put all those bits of information together, and you'll eventually in second tier get to the point where you've got immediate communication from your body that something's right or it's not right, which is then guiding your diet and behavior. Yeah.
Sounds like something to look forward to, because it just, I think, it just feels like I can sense that I can feel bits of what I feel like you describe in the integral sort of the layer 7 sort of perception and worldview and coping capacity. But I still feel very much like there's a lot of processing of different things going on and things yet to be healed. And so it's like almost you can see a certain light at the end of a tunnel, but you know that there is just certain territory that you have to traverse no matter what. You can't just skip to this certain spot.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a process, and it's also, one that requires patience. It's just a matter of understanding it. And when you've got a kind of a structure like Graves's model to inform you, then you can start to make deductions like you just have, that, okay, I can see that I'm going through this process. I haven't got all the answers yet, but I kind of understand, where I'm headed, and I kind of understand what might be next for me. And that's probably about as good as it gets right at the moment. The other interesting thing about second tier is that it's not locked into operating from just one value system, but it's kind of like a shapeshifter. And if there's a problem that can be solved by layer 6 processes, then you'll use that, or if there's a problem that can be solved by layer 1 or layer 2, you'll use that. So it's you're matching the complexity of the issue with the complexity of the solution, and just dynamically moving through the layers as you need to. You've been listening to the Future Sense podcast, brought to you by the non-profit Agency for Advanced Development of Integrative Intelligence, part of the RD Mesh Foundation. You can find us online at futuresense.it, where you can subscribe for free, and also link to our social media accounts on Twitter and Facebook.